Okay, yeah. This is like a... I've been trying to find it. I don't know what's happened to them, but this is a rainbow type pattern of like a skull cap with a sweatband in it. And I haven't been able to find them here recently. But this is like one of my favorite ones. Probably the favorite one. I'm trying to find some more so I can get some more, because this one's kind of really kind of wore out. Yeah, but anyway, yeah, so like I just want to talk a little bit about some of this lighting that is what I really think of a considerable amount about what availability means geographically in economics. Not limited to my thought of the New York Federal Reserve Bank. Also factors for like the Statue of Liberty, involving, you know, the 7-point crown and the 7 layers of the atmosphere seem to be the thing of the 7 nations, the 7 monies of Europe, because I've seen and heard, you know, Europe is like, you know, 7 nations, 7 monies, but it seemed to be, I've heard, you know, 7 layers of the atmosphere, yet I've seen and heard it as 5 layers of the atmosphere. I'm gonna have to actually think about it. I haven't even looked, I mean, like really at all in a long time. I'm thinking that the stratosphere is the 5th layer, and then there's a difference of 2 between the stratosphere and the ionosphere. But it seems to be those 2 layers is the thing about the marmalade sky and the weekend, potentially as a ratio of HTTP : the colon being a ratio based upon, you know, linguistic alphanumerics and symbolic and analytical of, like, you know, the 90-degree right angle, yet the pi r squared and the E equal mc squared, and, you know, like the HTTP : really being the ratio of the pi r squared, and the x is not the multiplication in algebra, okay, it's the dot. Okay, the thing about the colon is that the top dot is like the multiplication, at the bottom is like the 3.14, the point being the decimal. And I'm thinking somewhere in the atmosphere, you know, that one particular weekend of 1972 involving the marmalade sky is, you know, a difference of information being presented, and kind of like the memory that you know, it seemed to be, you know, the information was kind of like mixed and interchanged about distinguishing the difference between a country and a nation and a province, okay? But the thing about the province seems to be the color code of the pastels, predominantly of the green. Same thing about, you know, in my mind, you know, the Bermuda grass on a golf course, and the New Zealand thing about it, and the Greenland thing about it. Yet the pastel colors that's like on a 13-band graphic equalizer of, like, you know, infragreen and infrared. But the thing about amber waves of grain for purple mountains majesty, it seemed to be the thing of, like a biblical scripture, Jesus said he knew for the foundations of the earth, that's a heat-seeking type of color. And I'm thinking that it is the actual point of amber waves of grain and the field office that way. In what one Justice Park is as compared to TC gesture of the FBI, of the locations as a field office. And it's almost like in my mind, okay, because it seemed to be really, the thing about really this, let me do this again, okay, about the vision. And I think this is really my point right here in my mailbox, okay, as a current resident. And her with the white eyes, the white hair and the blue eyes, for LASIK laser corrective eye surgery, seem to be like, you know, all the available information in economics, like with lighting, laser lighting, and LASIK laser corrective eye surgery. And I'm thinking this is this particular person is of Dallas Faces International. The thing with this is that all this information about this one particular thing seems to be, you know, the memory, okay, of like a newborn child is predominantly the vision, not even having a concept of language. And somewhere in my mind, you know, it's kind of like almost like a make and model in anatomy and the blue ribbon cutting of a grand opening. My first thought of, like, when I was a newborn child, I think my very first memory, and I'm thinking it's the very first time I opened my eyes up, I mean right after being born, and I'm thinking that that was exactly what it was. It's like a gas mask anesthesia was like placed over my face. I mean, it's obviously a bigger one with a newborn child, And I think that is the very first thing that happened. I mean, the very first time I opened my eyes, not having a concept of language. And I'm almost thinking that this particular person right here is almost the idea of like a dimensional clause of like what's going on now that doesn't require an IP address or a domain name, or affected by deed restrictions being used as the lifespan of de facto. Yet a dimensional clause of like Washington D.C., although the area code 202 of an eternal treasury is kind of like, in my mind, a whole entire different television network of production, not necessarily in my mind, the thought of reproduction, okay? The thing about it is, okay, my first thought as a newborn child, I think was the very first time I opened my eyes up as a newborn child, that wherever I was at, I'm pretty sure it's probably somewhere potentially in either Harris County or Herman Hospital. I'm not really sure, although my birth certificate does say Southeast Memorial. And all the pastel colors is really the issue, but if my memory serves me correctly, there were like 3 lights above, grouped together as 3. And, you know, like predominantly the early 60s and mid 60s, the pastel like tile bricks seem to be really the thing. You know, I'd mentioned like Gary Busey in the movie Point Break, where he's talking to the FBI agent, telling him to die for a brick blindfolded. You know, I'm really thinking that really in my mind is it's really involving like imperial sugar and cubes of sugar about the coffee, and McDonald's hot cafe coffee cup, and the hot cafe actually being the actual letters of the 3 most simplest methods of addition, computation of the symbolic representation between the C and the PTIS. And you've heard, how do you like the coffee, black or coffee and cream? Obviously, you know, cream and sugar. But, you know, Gary Busey in that movie, Point Break, it's almost in my mind like the HTTP colon being, you know, the thing about that symbolic representation in between the C and the PTIS on the backside of the US $1, because, I mean, it's like totally a distinction and total turning point with just that one beyond 58. And it seemed to be, you know, like the quadrants of like the field scope and range is accuracy, and the aim high thing about the Air Force. Yet my first memory as a newborn child, I'm almost for certain it is the very first time I opened my eyes without not a concept of language, any language, and other than like years later. I mean, all the stuff is seemingly, really, all the information is in this area in Pearland, Texas now. And, you know, the thing about vision and this particular person in my mailbox, okay, because she's like in like a packet, okay, of coupons as a current resident, okay, and it's like automatically, you know, so like, wow, this is like a real keeper for real, okay. But the thing with this is that, I mean, it's been that, I mean, since really truthfully the first time, but, you know, I wasn't thinking about it quite the way that I am now, okay. And it seemed to be all that information, even the Bryan Adams music video. Do I have to say the words in Elton John's song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and follow the girl with the kaleidoscope eyes? Because Bryan Adams' music video, do I have to say the word? I mean, it's ultimately the thing about Istanbul, Turkey. And the thing about the turkey and Thanksgiving, and it seemed to be even involving, you know, the thought of like Vlasic. Even television programming during the JFK, Jackie Onassis, and it almost seems to be the thing about Lassie being the Vlasic. And the Vlasic is, you know, the Lassie, and the My Friend Flick thing about the dolphin on the Atlantic side, okay, and the eccentric triangle about that area of television programming, identifying, you know, the thought of the eccentric triangle that is truthfully used as plain horizons, identifying a nation's gross national product, the main product that the country, the nation produces as their main thought and motivation of like prosperity and manufacturing and distribution, and, you know, everything about, you know, exchange and what that is to importing and exporting, as compared to international banking systems that's identifying the value of money on a worldwide level. And that's what those eccentric triangles really are in economics and international importing and exporting. And yet all this information is like, you know, it's kind of like I've seen it come through Pearland, you know, more so like on a laptop based upon networking, and coming to a realization that like it's like different methods of banking and different banking systems coming through Pearland, and not really truthfully feeling the effect or not even recognizing anything about it. Seemed to be back in the 80s when it seemed to be not a question of the U.S. patent. Now it seemed to be the thing about, the national anthem. Almost like Kaepernick, on his knee on the sideline, not participating in the national anthem. And it seemed to be really the thing that's going on in Pearland, reflecting the idea of like a carbon footprint, absentee voting, or mechanics lien. And the thing about, trading energy in the North American Free Trade Act, North Atlantic Peace Treaties Organization, of a Stargate program. And, the invitations through that really seem to be of 1992 being invited by the Mormons to actually go to the Mormon church that actually led to the baptism on Flag Day, Saturday, June 14th, 1992, okay? And the water's warm. And that's, I'm just now really realizing that the water's warm, okay? And the thing about really, obviously, coffee, about the water being warm, that is the one and only baptism that the water was, warm. And it seemed to be the thing about, Gary Busey in that movie Point Break with, I'm trying to remember the FBI agents in a movie in Point Break, but Patrick Swayze is in Point Break, but he's about like catching the wave. And I think the wave ultimately is, I'm not sure if my memory serves me correctly, but I think it's like New Zealand or Greenland. It's not the normal thought of where the wave's at. And I'm thinking that's something about where the wave was. But anyway, that the FBI agent is like following him, and Patrick Swayze throughout the entire movie is saying he's going to catch the wave, and it really seemed to be what references as delta force of the wave, and the biggest wave, and even reference as what seemed to be now the VSAT communications of the 2 KU bands in Kuwait, and the weight being Department of Weights and Measurement, and the poll, the Nielsen polls, okay. Here's the thing about Kaepernick on the sidelines on his knee, is that all this information, and Kaepernick's word is like collusion. He's on his knee, not participating in the national anthem on the San Francisco 49ers, okay? And the thing about the 49ers being, the exact opposite of 49 being 94, annotated adoption abortion, which, I've stated like many times on my channel, Wade ASV, Pretty PRIDDY, YouTube.com, and is now going to be going to the Wade ASV Pretty 55 or 55. Okay, 555, yeah. I might go to a prefix of 3, going 555 at YouTube.com. This is a new phone right here, okay? And already the second day there's like issues going on with like what is presented as Google. There was some information that caused a little bit of technical difficulty, from the very beginning. And some of the icons have turned to like a gray and became dormant and not active. So I like taking the phone to where I purchased it and trying to get a refund or maybe an upgrade or a different phone, and really just wasn't going to happen at the time. So like I installed my own upgraded version of like a media file, MP4 format. And that's what I did, and this is what you'll be seeing it on now, because what was like provided, what would be the impression of a standard as maybe a software that would be some idea maybe attached to the printed circuit board as, a fixation, not necessarily just a install that can be uninstalled. But that's the thing about some of these mobile apps, that they're presenting it as something that had been installed and could be uninstalled, but it like after like 3 or 4 days it converted from like to a disable or forced stop. And it's like I was asking that guy, is that like something about supplemental security income? Like are you providing a disability in the form of communications as not being able to uninstall it, and it's like it converts to like a disable or forced stop? Is that like antisocial software, implying that participating factor had actually had no other alternative to uninstall what was like being presented as available, then converts to some idea of like a disable or force stop, and not even be able to uninstall it, and it presents all those problems that really the Safari browser was presenting. It's like a progressive it's almost like the way amyloidosis works in anatomy. An overabundant amount of white blood cells, okay, an exposure that affects the bone marrow, and in turn affects the immunoglobulin, and produces an overabundant amount of white blood cells, predominantly, thought of like during oncology and treatment for cancer to combat, slow down any progression or remission is the way it's been said. In any case, so like, all that information, it seemed to be like, some idea of like Sarbanes and Oxley, financial instruments, SOX compliance. And the only thing about it seemed to be, the Chicago White Sox and the Boston Red Sox, two of the 12 major cities with 12 Federal Reserve Banks, okay? Yet the color code of phlebotomy and, the red blood cell and the white blood cell. And it seemed to be all that information with like the barrel of fun, okay? As a huge centrifuge. Yet the color of the Astros uniform being like the Marmalade Sky of 1972 and the Elton John song. And his initials, EJ of Elton John, being EJ and 15, like the prefix of the White House, okay? The thing with it is that all this information is kind of like, this person, it's really kind of had my attention, but progressively with like a lot of this information, from the beginning, it's, like once again, hey, wow, and, but when I was like really realizing, after I got this lighting, it was like hearing the same music videos, and Bryan Adams is one of them about do I have to say the words? And I was like asking myself, are those like zoom lenses of like something of night vision? And then I realized at the end of the lens, it looks like the kaleidoscope eyes of Elton John's song, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. And Follow the Girl with the Kaleidoscope Eyes. Okay, Bryan Adams, okay, is in Istanbul, Turkey. And he's presenting what looks like a Ford Pinto window, a 1972 Ford Pinto window. Yet it seemed to be the thing about Ford Aerospace. Have you driven a Ford lately? It's like a rear window of a Pinto, yet the rear window of that taxi in Istanbul, Turkey, it seemed to be, using it like a burial type of taxi. It seemed to be the thing about, the mind's eye about, certain parts of those videos, and a lot of places that, it's taken, like during a Stargate program, of a lot of air raids, okay? And it seemed to be, ultimately it had been to the point of memory that, it looked like it, based upon all of the information available, it had got to a point of a 2-year, but maybe a 3-year duration. It seemed to be, really, the one baptism of the water that seemed to be the warm water, the Mormon Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints in Friendswood, Texas, is in my mind not a question of being the Region 1 location. About the falling leaf being the idea that the Canadian flag at the border is like in Friendswood, Texas. And really in my mind it seemed to be really about that. One particular day on June 14th, 1992, on Flag Day, the thing of it is that all this information, it had caught my attention in a whole different perception. Okay, I'm a drummer, okay, and since this is on my new phone, and I'll probably be more than likely hold on, be more than likely doing it, and yeah, so I'm gonna get that going and see what the deal is about that. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, sure it is. Yeah. So like anyway, and I was noticing about the the laser technology that's involved with these particular videos because yeah. So like anyway, it kind of really caught my attention when I was realizing that a lot of music videos I perform and practice. I do like really simple and easy, more than 3,000 songs, okay? And when I was like putting myself on YouTube.com, I invested probably close to $15,000 to start like a recording studio. I was in preparation of starting to soundproof and, kind of modify the situation, but progressively it seemed to be the real issue of like pledging allegiance. I'm not pledging allegiance to furniture polish, although the end of the thing was like happening. I pledge allegiance. Really pledged allegiance to what? A Vice President network is furniture polish. As Indoes is like the music industry, like So like all this stuff is like going on like in my home and what access is meant, okay? And like really cool about, you know, I mean, you can see it on my drum set. It's like a film of like that kind of dust, okay? And all things are going on affecting my respiratory, which has really been going on really way longer, seemingly of allergens and not limited to, okay? But the thing with this is that all this information is kind of like, you know, I'm not trying to play an alphanumeric game or have a cough just because someone thinks that maybe McDonald's Hot Cafe coffee cup is presenting the idea of the alphanumerics of 58, which are the actual letters as a symbolic representation on the backside of the US $1 being a total of 58. Yet, I mean, getting beyond 58 is really, in my mind, the new beginning, seemingly beyond the thought of maybe a carbon footprint, absentee voting, or mechanics lien as trading energy, seemingly ultimately involving center point energy and the euro dollar. Seemingly thing going beyond what has been like here on like in Texas as a center point energy. Actually, the center point energy like smart meter seem to be, I mean, like a transponder as a haloed latitude in orbit. I mean, at this location here in Pearland, okay? And all these things are going on. It's kind of like, you know, it's kind of like, it seems to be like, you know, determination that has led to some idea of me being on supplemental security of non-taxable income from the United States Treasury, okay? And, you know, so it's kind of like in my mind, you know, experiencing, you know, progression and someone else's thought of thinking like, causing an added extra expense and all this, because like I had invested like close to $15,000, okay, in music equipment, okay, for the recording studio, and like put myself really beginning the year 2020 to the year 2022, and all these factors were coming in like really my pledge and allegiance to furniture polish and experiencing the music industry is like indust, and all the, you know, the contaminants and things causing like respiratory and all kinds of issues. I mean, that's what's really going on when you're seeing quite a bit of the music videos. It's like air quality and contaminants and like that dust, okay? And it's really affecting really not only my health but my attitude, and I'm trying to like maintain all the way through it, okay? But I mean, it got to the point every time I left my home, I mean, even in the ditches, in the gutters, in the culverts under the driveway, crossing over from like the street into any driveway, was becoming like a pipeline. What would be maybe normally the thought of maybe a sprinkler system for the lawn, and it's like an entire like circuit of like air quality coming up through the ground, in the ditch, in the fields. I mean, everywhere I was going for quite some time, even like places where I like normally like ate at and purchases, and people were like starting to like kind of like messing up like everything I have of like transportation, okay? Based upon my birth year, okay, in 1964, okay, or the thought of, you know, maybe the thought of 64 being an American, you know, I'm not real sure if that's ultimately the idea of a vice president network maybe not being region 1, or the idea maybe of whether or not of citizenship and birthrights up in the air for grabs, okay, over like some surface to air missile, okay, surface to air, you know, some idea of like attempting to complete a pass, okay. You know, my thought of an incomplete pass is not necessarily the idea of like launching, you know, some wishful thinking, okay. In any case, so like anyway, so like I was like kind of like thinking about that, and you know, we International, the alphanumerics of 181 Houston, Texas, okay. I'm not real clear on, you know, the real issue, okay. Although like I simply and easily do more than 3,000 songs on like my drums, okay. Yeah, what you're seeing is really like all the stuff that I'm talking about going on in coordination, seemingly affecting, you know, the degree and experience of some real serious degree, you know, stuff going on about it, okay. And trying to stay calm about a lot of stuff about this, because like the thought of like real estate becoming the idea of depreciation involving, you know, conditions that would be normally considered like really not normal, although degreed, okay. My thing is that really ultimately, you know, all this information has really been the idea of like a commercial venue of living quarter that's not affected by television programming or the thought of like deed restriction being used as a lifespan of de facto, somewhere in between litigation and res habeas corpus is auditing legal media, okay. what I'm trying to do is stay focused in direction, not from jumping from like direction to direction, but and back to it again. It seemed to be that really ultimately my point in the beginning was really starting with just the vision of a newborn child, which seems to be now the affirmative action of like the Air Force. Okay, I mean, the very first time I opened my eyes at birth, and I'm almost certain, I mean, the very first time, that's what the whole issue has really been on memory, minus the fact of being 35, of like, you know, Interstate 45 in Austin, or the idea that fake news would only be the idea of 84 lumber based upon a wooden buffalo nickel, and wooden with 1D is like 76, with 2Ds is 80, and with 3Ds, the isometric value of actual participation beyond a signature of an endorsement, okay, like in blueprints, a wooden with 3Ds is like 84. Trump refers to fake news, and alphanumerically it is 84, okay? Lumber being like 71 in Pearland, okay? But ultimately in my mind, the McDonald's Hot Cafe coffee cup, you know, at the same time it's like Maxwell Smart, you know, so Agent 99, so Get Smart, Get Maxwell Smart, and between Harrisburg and Navigation and Nabisco, and all that information, okay? Because somewhere in my mind, all this has led to, you know, the thought of being on supplemental security income, of non-taxable income, now seem to be, you know, all the information about the blue public telephones, okay, of Southwestern Bell, and that baptism June 14th, 1992 at the Mormon Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that, like, once again, I've seen it spelt and pronounced 3 different ways: desert, dessert, and deseret, at Sunset Boulevard, which is really the thing for me personally about waking up on a Sunday at sunset. Is obviously now that baptism 20 years later of 1972 and 1992 of the Marmalade Sky. And, you know, you probably heard it, because remembering, you know, the thought of like, hey, what's your 20, is really now seeming to be exactly, you know, what that 20 is, as of the Marmalade Sky at the baptism. From Pearland, okay, in 1972 at 1136 Union Valley, Pearland, Texas, 77581, here in Pearland is the location of the Marmalade Sky. But, you know, like I say, that weekend I went to sleep probably around 5:30, maybe 6 p.m. And when I woke up, I thought it was only be 2 or 3 hours later, the same day on Friday, but it was actually at sunset. And it's really like really clicking in my mind. It really was sunset on Sunday, okay? And I'm not sure if the Marmalade Sky of like the stratosphere of the orangest day, I mean, in my entire life, involving obviously the stratosphere, is the thing about the Pearl Vision VSX, you know, ISS mounted like strata colors, the red, the blue, and the yellow gold. It is the yellow gold. For every reason, the strata yellow gold. It's kind of like the idea of Chuck Woolery saying 2 and 2, and McDonald's golden arches of like, you know, 2 cycles being side by side of a degree level or reputable standards of consensual participation, although the one cycle per second being measured in oscillations half above and half below, but at a 90 it looks like a US dollar. Yet at a 90 of a US dollar with one line through it, at a 90, you know, it looks like a one cycle being measured in oscillation of frequency, okay? But, you know, the whole point of it becoming side by side again is like it, you know, once again, the Christian symbolic representation of Christianity. Somewhere in my mind, you know, automatically the idea that the biggest mouth of the river is called the Delta, yet, you know, a triangle and a pyramid at the same time, yet the biggest mouth, and involving anatomy seemed to be the thing about, you know, anatomy, yet in my mind the Mississippi being like the affirmative flow tube. On a continental level, it's kind of like in my mind, you know, the thing about fertility and the fish swimming upstream, okay? And the thing about, normally it's identified as salmon. I don't think it's limited to at all, but the thing about fish swimming upstream is really the thing about, you know, the ladder. In my mind, even ultimately, you know, the Statue of Liberty, about that symbolic representation of the US dollar with the S with one line to it representing the US dollar. You looking like a center line of oscillation with one frequency being measured per second in oscillation at a 90. It becoming side by side like an electronic schematic fish, actually the fertility. And the thing about the biggest mouth of the river, you know, in the affirmative fallopian tube, the thing of it is that it presents the idea of continental reference as, you know, fertility. And a fish swimming upstream in that ladder is ultimately in my mind, you know, really about the Statue of Liberty. Not limited to including high rise, but the thing with it is that it presents the information in that way. What would normally be the idea of gastroenterology, of terminology, identifying like a fish. Okay, and people normally don't think of it that way, but you know, a little bit of humor between the solar system, okay, and naming that tune on Neptune, or the net being the pen, or Chase ink, you know, and paper made, okay. But the thing with this is that on Neptune, somewhere between, you know, Uranus and like Venus, okay, it's like I waited my whole life to be polite, okay. So like in any case, okay, so it has that little bit of humor about that, okay. But the thing with this is that it goes on and on, okay. But the thing that really I want to say, I keep doing it, it's like my first time that I opened my eyes is to think that I'm referring to a vision without not a concept of language. In my mind, this person, because of the county roads, like once again, okay, being County Road 107, only one with no alphabetical letter, and then there's 107 only numerically, and then after that it's like 107A, 107B, 107C, all the way to G, okay, but the one numerical value allowed for the G and the H to alternate. Yet in the word light, this being a LASIK laser corrective eye surgery, and all this information is kind of like, you know, in my mailbox just really became the awareness, okay, of this. Every time this particular person of this particular coupon of LASIK laser corrective eye surgery was in my mailbox, okay, Mercedes-Benz, I mean, for real, it's almost like the Rush song of Chase Manhattan, the camera eye, payments made team with intense energy. It's like every time this coupon is in my mailbox, Mercedes-Benz on FM 518 here in Pearland was like in front of me, beside me, behind me, in oncoming traffic. I mean, I even talked about it, but I mean, I just didn't realize, I mean, the connectivity. Yet at the same time, all the SUVs were coming through Pearland for several different durations. What seemed to be ultimately, you know, New York television programming. New and used SUVs was coming through Pearland with like Z71 on it, okay. New, brand new. I mean, virtually every make and model of SUVs, I mean, had a Z71 on it for several times at several lengths of duration coming through Pearland. I mean, it's beyond like, I mean, how could anyone like not notice it and see it, you know, driving around, okay. But in any case, so like all this information, it had developed into the perception of the availability, because me spending, you know, close to 15,000 if not more, which ultimately resulted in a 10,000 watt power amp, a Rockville, okay, a 32 channel mixing board, a Behringer Ultra Curve Pro, multi effects digital signal processor, customizing waveform, and it has several, you know, factors, including, you know, like a spectrum analyzer. But you know, it's like it seemed to be like the Euro-dollar thing coming through like Pearland, and the availability, and including what networking had. But it seemed to be presenting the issue of like not a cool experience at the same time of seemingly and I don't want to get into all that like right now. But openly, you know, it's kind of like, you know, had like a Les Paul, like electric guitar. I was going to get the the Yamaha the Yamaha oh god, Montage 8, yes, the Montage 8 flagship, okay. I'm not real clear about the flagship part about it, but I mean, automatically in my mind, that was the one I was wanting to get, okay. And it was really a factor of having, you know, enough all at the same time, and like still getting like my drum set, and having a special purchase, you know, what it is on the channel Wade SV Pretty PRDDY at youtube.com, which is actually a 35 piece double bass drum set, a Pearl Vision VSX, and a Strata Red, and virtually all of my samples are like Zildjian 8 custom cymbals, okay. But anyway, so like all that was like going on, okay. And you know, like 7 like PA speakers, like 2 of them like 1500 watts, and like 4 of them like 3000 watt, you know, PA like dual 15-inch subwoofers with like, you know, really big like tweeter horns, okay. And when it's all cranked up and hooked up, I mean, it's like close to 20,000 watts, although a 10,000 watt power amp distributing that much wattage per channel really, it sounds like, you know, a total pretty close to like 20,000 really, with the radiance of the speakers. But anyway, so like I was really cranking it up, and I had a Yamaha E810, which is a special effects modulator, okay, a signal processor for like drums, with acoustics, and attached as an acoustic like type of microphone mounting on the bass drums, okay. I had to buy 2 of them, okay, for a double bass drum set. Yet it's just not really, you know, I was like really thinking that I was really wanting triggers that could just simply and easily tape through the drum head, and, you know, based upon vibration, you know, have a trigger system. Yet what the Yamaha E810 is like an audible microphone with the sensitivity that picks up the toms directly, like mounted on the bass drum. Yet, you know, my hi-hat to the left, you know, with like 3 rotos and 4 octobans, and the hi-hat having a hi-hat tambourine, placing it, you know, kind of towards to the left side of the bass drum to pick up that audible sound. I mean, it's like the sensitivity is like really good enough, okay, but not quite the individual like miking of each part, and actually, you know, invested in like microphones as well. But all these things that were like going on progressively, kind of like presenting all this issue of like, you know, access, okay, and it ultimately seemed to be now what has been the thought of like the idea of like having fair use, which is the thing of international law of intellectual property. And it's almost like the FDIC claim and intellectual property of having fair use but not claiming ownership of the rights, okay, which ultimately, you know, that's the thing of obviously vice president networks, and like where's human capital in everyone's lives about, you know, a method of banking, okay. So I mean, it got to like even my name, Wade Sterling Pretty, okay, being Alpha Mercs 213, and seemingly like, you know, the thing about the front lines of the beach run is kind of like it's got to the point, you know, that maybe I've been considering changing my name to Aryan Skies of Latin, is a thought getting beyond maybe a ship channel. I mean, if I'm just going to absolutely have to do that, well then, well, you know, I've been talking about it for quite some time, but I mean, this is going on, and I had like $15,000 worth of recording equipment and musical instruments, and like, and I was going to get the Yamaha Montage 8, okay, flagship, okay, it was like my preference from the very beginning, but ultimately, you know, I got a Yamaha Modi X6, it's a 61 key synthesizer, and a Roland Juno 88, which is an 88 key synthesizer, okay, which is really just fine. It's just that, you know, really I was really wanting, and I'm still going to, you know, eventually get it for like a recording studio, okay, but the thing about, you know, Yamaha Montage 8, okay, the flagship, yeah, so like anyway, so like I have now I'm like really, I'm looking at that Ibanez guitar. I'm really wanting a 7-string, but it's the Ibanez 6-string. When it gets to be the same make and model with a 7-string, I'll be getting that as well. But I mean, with all that equipment, with like you know, limiter expander and compressor, plus the idea of like a Tascam like a recorder and all that, I mean, you know, pretty close to $15,000, and all this is going on, and having a need for mobility, electric scooters for mobility, it got to the point of like what's going on in my home, being hospitalized, you know, for like a 16-month period. Ultimately, you know, the 15th month, okay, I didn't have to call 911, really looking, you know, ridiculously. I mean, automatically in my mind after the 3rd time, I'm thinking, I mean, I knew immediately that it was like really a respiratory and a blood circulation issue. Yet every single time being admitted with an admitting diagnosis to the ER is being identified as congestive heart failure. I mean, from the word get-go, I didn't believe, I mean, not one thing about it, okay, or the medication being prescribed actually causing the congestive factor of the prescription being prescribed by cardiologists and even ER, okay. So like in my mind, you know, both my mother and father passed away with cancer, okay, and I picked up quite a bit of being with them, you know, I mean, firstly through, I mean, everything about, you know, really 2 separate durations of a 2-year and a 3-year. My mother was a 3-year period, excuse me, my mother was a 2-year period and my father was a 3-year period, really a total of 5 years, okay. And in between my mother passing away first, which is actually the day of Barack Obama's inauguration, January 21st, I think it's 2001, I'm trying to remember if it was 2000, but it's like January 21st, and President Barack Obama's inauguration day. In any case, okay, so like my father that got cancer too, I think it was like 6 or 7 years later, and a 2-year period passed, and both of them chose hospice to stay here and pass away, and I stayed here and, you know, like really took care of them, you know, in between like chemo, and did whatever I could do, you know, to make them, you know, as comfortable as possible. But anyway, so like I picked up on a lot of terminology during that time, predominantly like at MD Anderson, you know, cancer treatment facilities in the Clear Lake, Texas area, including the medical center, okay? In any case, so like it went off into a whole different idea, which seemed to be almost factors of MRIs, presenting some idea of isotopes and magnetic resonance that actually somehow seemed to be something of edible products, and making during my experience of like considerable amount becoming like a consumer of like something like would be of magnetic resonance, yet not realizing that had actually taken place based upon access to my home. And you know, the factors of a 10,000, I'm almost for certain it's not limited to, but you know, I'd seen and heard of, you know, a lot of musicians and bands doing the unplugged version, okay, and I really didn't know what that was all about, other than, I mean, really not at all, other than it being unplugged and it being acoustic, okay? And it really got to that point in my home because I was actually becoming, and before I even realized it, the consumption that obviously involved, you know, during some idea of terminology, maybe just $4 of performance monitoring, but it seemed to be, you know, the factor of like magnetic resonance that is involved with like, you know, MRIs had been maybe a factor of consumption. That actually turned my body into a conductor, my home being turned into like an electrical storm, getting shocked in midair while I'm, you know, playing my drums. And all these things were like going on when I started recording in my home with my drum set, okay, and getting more equipment, more lighting, progressively all the way through it, okay. But all these things were going and like resulted in, you know, the need for like mobility scooters. All these things are going on, okay. And you know, from like 2020 to the year 2022, and then in addition, okay, from like 1979 to 43 years later, in 2022, the second time, and it's only because it's the second time that I knew for the first time that a laser had really been involved, what I thought was only a pitching injury, because, you know, I normally average consistently pretty close to like an 87-mile-an-hour fastball as a pitcher in Little League and like high school, being clocked at with a radar gun, okay? And like I just thought maybe I was just like, you know, throwing the ball a little bit harder. But anyway, like my arm like dropped, okay? But I had no idea that a laser had been involved. And the before, during, and after became a reality. I mean, 43 years later, I'm under my carport and realizing that it was a laser causing my shoulder to feel that pain. And in addition, you know, I was burning on my left calf muscle, and it like left an impression of like little blister bubbles of a TB test going through the 12 public grades of education, normally on the forearm. And the blisters were like forming on my calf muscle as I'm under there, and I'm realizing that a laser is like within walking distance, and I'm looking right at the area, really, seemingly ultimately now. Even the idea of like robotic laser surgery, seemingly of the remote drone pilots, is seem to be really the issue of like even security cameras in banks. My thought really is ultimately a Chevy Chase movie of that capability of like satellites orbiting the Earth and like international space stations, of the laser in the movie, best defense. But really in my mind, really it's about the rainbow. Although in that movie it's got that red laser shattering a glass and on patio furniture right next to the pool. But Chevy Chase on the map in Washington D.C. is all about the Department of Education, okay? But I mean, it's like ultimately gets to baptism terminology as a fireside chat of the marmalade sky, of like all the buoyancy and all the terminology of a marmalade sky, yet a baptism, yet a boycott and embargo, yet even the psychic warrior, America's foremost psychic spy, and the cover of the top secret CIA Stargate program. I mean, on the front book cover, the guy is underwater like a baptism, okay? I mean, the Stargate program, okay? I mean, the last name on there, I'm not sure if I remember the first name, but the last name of the guy, the author, is Morehouse, okay? Which seems to be the issue now of this home rocking like a big ship in the ocean. It's kind of like, I mean, it's really not cool feeling like my home with a foundation that's really close to 3,300 square feet with a cathedral ceiling. It's like rocking like a ship in the middle of the ocean, okay? I mean, not cool at all, okay? I mean, for real. I mean, that's not cool to me, like, really, at all, okay? But, I mean, it's like really not cool, okay? I'm not really liking anything about it, really. But anyway, okay? So, like, anyway, okay? But the thing with this is that it's got to the point, you know, that you know, all this thinking about, like, wade fishing, or the thought of, like, gastroenterology terminology as fishing, as compared to the thought of, you know, the idea of, like, a news anchor is the Goodyear blimp, and going beyond, you know, I waited my whole life to be polite, somewhere between gastroenterology and gynecology, and, you know, I waited my whole life to be polite. Wow. Wow, so, like, okay, so, like, now there's, like, you know, somewhere, like, in the solar system, you know, on Neptune, it seemed to be the thing about the pen and Chase Ink and Papermate of Neptune, being the thing about Chase Ink and Papermate being 56-10, ultimately the Alpha in 94, or Roe v. Wade, about annotated adoption and abortion, and state statutes annotated, and the whole idea of relation of architecture, platform, embedded encryption, okay? But, I mean, my name is Wade, okay? And I mean, you know, really based upon a really experience of a baptism, okay? That led me really getting serious about reading and looking for information, really, that was like, the idea of like mental telepathy minus God, okay? Or like 151, Holy Spirit. You know, it's kind of like in my mind automatically, you know, that really, you know, after a spiritual experience seemingly of like a mental magnetic uplifting, like a telepathic birth, okay, of a baptism, okay, and like the same nights, several hours later, it's kind of like, you know, I'm kind of like wondering, you know, really, I mean, air quality has obviously been a factor throughout my years in Pearland, and even the marmalade sky seemed to be a factor of me being asleep for 2.5 days, okay, and falling asleep on a Friday, and then when waking up Sunday at 2.5 days later at Sunset Boulevard. I mean, at Sunset, okay, but like 20 years later at Sunset Boulevard of the Mormon Church. I mean, 20 years later of that weekend, and it seemed to be the thing about May, June, July, and August seemed to be, I mean, the 4 presidents of the Marmalade Sky of 1972, and it seemed to be really those 4 months, identifying something about 4 presidents and what each month means to each president here in Pearland. Seemingly the thing about, you know, all that terminology of like, you know, hey, what you 20? So like anyway, so like from 1972 to now in the year 2026, okay, all this information like been going on, okay, because when I started studying alphanumerics, I mean, it was, I mean, non-stop, I mean, as often as possible, I mean, day and night. I mean, you know, finding, you know, certain information was like one thing, and in the beginning, you know, it looks ridiculously, I mean, like something like I wouldn't like show anyone, okay, I mean, it looks ridiculously, considering everything that was involved, okay. But, you know, getting to the point, at that point, not just looking for analytical, symbolic at the very beginning, at random, not even knowing, I mean, it looks like really, I mean, like, not cool, not anything, but really remembering certain factors, of it really, really looking that way. It was like something I would like really even show anyone, other than just attempting to combine some thought of information, and at the same time learning alphanumeric values of like A to Z, for at least a minimum of like, you know, A to Z being 1 to 26, then repeated again, you know, from 27 to 52, then 53 to 78, then 79 to 104 is like the 4 generations in the King James Version Bible in my mind, okay? Predominantly progressively is when it chronological from, you know, from left to right, like reading English, okay? But when I got serious about, you know, the linguistic side and combining, really at a point of the MSN, combining 2 of like alphanumeric value, or just alphanumeric, or just the word itself, and like having an analytical and symbolic, you know, analytical, and studying with 2 numbers over the MSN factor, like being a balance of the 2, you know, middle letters in the alphabet, became a principle of practical application in many different ways, using 2 combines as an analytical, symbolic, or just, you know, alphanumeric, or, you know, studying, you know, if it be the idea of ratio or comparison or compatibility. I mean, I was using that MSN that way studying analytically and symbolically that way, and linguistically that way. But anyway, yeah, so the MSN thing about it being 55 heaven in the sky is only in my mind. 9 degree of the equator is a point of origin of military time, okay? Similarly, the thing about the longitude at any longitude, or some idea of the transponder being the like center point of energy ultimately of the Eurodollar here in Pearland, Texas, okay? Because it seemed to be really the truth about a carbon footprint, absentee voting, and the mechanics land of like trading energy. And what the driveway is having fair use, and what intellectual property only means as access, okay? And it would be really possibly only the difference between public and private, and maybe whether if there's a gate or not involved with the driveway would probably be the only distinguishable real difference. But in any case, so like all that information going on, okay, and in my mind, okay, that when back to the very point, it seemed to be like my first time I opened my eyes, the very first time, it seemed to be the affirmative action of pilot terminology of just a vision, no concept of language. Like a newborn child. It was almost like, like being brought back to my own home of like 1995. There was like so many places. It was so intense. I don't even like saying traumatic. Really, for my own reason. But, in any case, it's like the memory, it's like it's so hard to remember, really, because of the experience in a 25 going on 30 year duration of like not even realizing that memory had been a huge factor of a Stargate program. Going through the circuit, okay, wasn't a Stargate program to me at all. Like I already knew that like certain people in entertainment are involved, like in military, jumping in and out of uniforms, okay, going through the circuit. Like I already like knew that, okay. It wasn't even a Stargate program at that point. Really, it was really after 25 to 30 years had passed, and then the memory minus factor, the memory minus the facto became the issue of 35, being 35, Highway 35 in Pearland, and the thing about, Austin and Interstate 35 being the thing about Austin Powers Blue Bonnet Imperial Eagle. And that seemed to be the thing of like Imperial Drive. Even the geographics of the immediate area, the Mormon Church in Friendswood, Texas, and the Falling Leaf being 1 block and 2 blocks away, like switching, and like they were switching signs all around the Houston areas, like street signs. Like my name, Wade, W-A-D-E, used to be on the west side, on I-10, west of West Loop 610 in the Bunker Hill area, but on the north side of I-10. Then moved all the way to the San Jacinto Monument area, close to a reservoir. Completely the opposite, and I'm kind of like thinking, something about We International being 181, or electronic power in Houston, Texas, or, think about Pearland, Texas being 140, and like USA, the alphanumerics of 41, combined with 140 being 181, or attenuation, which seemed to be really the big deal about electronics, involving digital signal processing speed, predominantly in my direction of like special effects and audio production. Yet it seemed to be the thing about quantum and chemistry, even of catalyst, processing speed of catalyst, what some people might recognize as a time release of what used to be a color code of like time release factors of like diet pills, okay? It's like a catalyst of like processing speed, okay? Of catalyst, okay? And a color code even of electronics, for real, okay? The thing with this is, okay, is that like it seemed to be the movie RoboCop of the Transco Tower, of the word attenuation being 140 in Pearland, Texas. If the Transco Tower is like on Post Oak, that turned into the Williams Tower, okay? Is the thing about it. And it seemed to be that automation and robotics, I think, is involving the same word, and it probably is RoboCop, but it seemed to be the quantum and the compatibility somewhere between calculus, the 1E, you get that symbolic representation between the C and the PTIS on the backside of the US $1 bill, that halo left side, getting beyond 58, and when it's just that one line, and actually living here in Pearland, it being like Highway 59 is 140 in Pearland, Texas, it's really, like a 90 degree, a pi r squared, and E equal MC squared, and exponential quotients of power multiplication, yet the quadrants of architecture, platform, embedding encryption of like international financial management of SAN software, yet the globalization of like, the world globe, presenting it as like the Oval Office in relation and anatomy, yet like the globe, it looks like, 4 footballs. Yet in anatomy, it looks like, everything about relation where it matters, okay? And the thing about the Oval Office is about, all that really about really that. And the word globalization is like, the word, anyway. Even of a total of international financial management, globalization, covers pretty much the shape of like all that, including even a toilet, okay? But it seems to be that really Chase is the one that really narrows it down through the history of the U.S. dollar, ultimately leading to England, and it gets to the outhouse and Commonwealth, tracing history based upon language, and Chase is the thing about ultimately the outhouse and Commonwealth in terminology, identifying English and the transition between like English to the idea of the English pound, and a real serious duration of history, backdating, way back. But Chase is like the one, it translates based upon geographics only because of English. But you've heard of steeplechase, okay? But it's like the US dollar, yet the English pound, yet the pastel colors of a 13-band graphic equalizer, and infragreen and infrared of like night vision on the 13-band graphic equalizer, the ambience being a pastel green, yet, infragreen of like night vision, and the pastel red of the impedance, yet a 13-band graphic equalizer, yet night vision. And the only thing about amber waves of grain is the color would seem to be like the University of Texas. The amber waves of grain like a burnt orange. Yet in my mind it seemed to be the heat-seeking thing about the field office of the FBI and the biblical scriptures. Jesus said he knew for the foundations of the earth like a field office. And it really seemed to be that heat seeker of the amber waves of grain being like the thing about the heat seeker and the color code of why Orange County is Orange County, because it's kind of like a burnt orange, yet a pastel color, identifying heat-seeking, and it seemed to be the biblical scripture. At the same time, Jesus said he knew before the foundation of the earth, like a field office, like the FBI, okay, of heat-seekers, not limited to, even like of Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and a point of origin of military time, okay, and it seemed to be like all that combine of that way of thinking of the amber waves of grain for Purple Mountain's majesties above the fruited plain, America, America. Yeah, so like it seemed to be the amber waves of grain really about that biblical scripture of a field office. Yet the heat seeker and the color code of the biblical scripture, Jesus said knew for the foundation of the earth like a field office, okay? And that's the thing about that heat seeking thing in my mind. Really what is shown on world news is really that of like military time, okay? Not ever really talked about it like the way I'm talking about it now, but it really simply, exactly that. So so that's kind of like what I'm thinking about now. It's already going on like 57 minutes, but yeah, that's kind of like wanting to stay on that vision and like affirmative action of a pilot's terminology of like when I opened my eyes for the first time right after my birth, and only a concept of vision, and I'm seeing the silence of this neighborhood, seemingly of like the word light and LASIK laser corrective eye surgery, of like the street signs and the county road signs alternating, and it seemed to be the G and H of the word light and the silence in this way right there of LASIK laser corrective eye surgery, okay? But I had a whole different perception other than the automatic hey wow, but anyway, yeah, so like I've been thinking about since the first time, and have a whole different way of thinking about it. And it really only in my mind seems to be really what would be automatically the thought or perception of the blue eyes being the thing about, heaven in the sky, and the MSN thing about the alphanumerics, and just the color code of something, really in that way. And I think of it that way because, as a matter of fact, it's kind of like giving the impression that the silence of a picture and this kind of road, and that's when I really started thinking about realizing that I drove around and noticed that normally predominantly it was only like 107 as a county road, and only numerical, yet beyond that was the 107A, 107B, 107C, all the way to G. But it seemed to be, when I saw that 107H, it allowed that one numerical value, 107, to allow the G and H to alternate. And at that time, I wasn't even thinking of LASIK laser corrective eye surgery or light being 56, like the prefix of the White House, 4, 5, and 6, yet the second and third number of the prefix and the W of the prefix being 5 and 6, but the second and third seemingly of Sigma Alpha Delta Kappa Phi, and one of the letters being applied to the Boolean chart of Stargate symbolic representation of sequencing, characterization of such 6 in audio production and special effects in waveform, and the word attenuation, okay? Yet, the alphanumeric 6 is like a VPN and 52 of a vice president network. All that information, it's kind of like when I realized that the county road had alternated, and I have this picture of this one particular person, okay? And ever since, hey, it's kind of like that Neutrogena commercial, hey, this is a keeper. And really, it seemed to be really that being provided as what it means, availability means geographically in economics, has really went really beyond really the automatic, hey, wow, for real. So anyway, so that's really the way I've been thinking about it. And even the make and model issue that seemed to be the blue ribbon cutting of a grand opening, and what a make and model seemed to has really been. And now it's kind of like in my mind, it's kind of like, hey, another make and model, maybe me having a conscious participating factor beyond the thought of Babylon being 71 in Pearland, okay? I'm at the age of 61, okay? And all this make and model stuff is like, it really got to the point what it means in relation, okay? In a way of like a make and model, and a whole different perception of like really what it is in isometric volume, okay? As compared to a blue ribbon cutting of a grand opening, it seemed to be a phenomenally huge secret, okay? In any case, so like it has really developed into the perception of really talking about it on YouTube, okay? Me being a drummer, probably if I weren't a drummer, I would possibly not even have a need or feel like, hey, I'm going to be on like YouTube or Facebook, talking about this kind of stuff, because this is like unlike any other information, the way it happens. And the thing about like grandfathered corporate law of retroactive presidential administration, following certain movie stars, and what I mean by following them is just knowing what actor and actress has been in what movie. But it's kind of like I see that in like many movies, even like bands like that I listen to anyway, even not listen to but know about. It's same the grandfathered corporate law of retroactive presidential administration, seeing all the different places, seems that a lot of them are focusing on non-taxable income of supplemental security income, and the difference between the White House and the color code of the 1040 EZ form being a baby blue, and it's kind of like baby being 30 and blue being 40. Yet it seemed to be the predominant thing that seemed to be entitlement of what is identified in real estate as finder's fee. And they're not really talking about it really the way the color code, the Air Force One President of the United States being baby blue, and it being like 30-year finance homes having coverage that in event that prevents default, not having any claim or using it is to do like the refund about it, okay? And it's a 30-year and a 40-year. Normally if homes really not limited to, in my mind, it's the automatic range back in early to mid 1970s to like the early 80s, when seemingly my memory seemed to be focusing on more of what I'd heard as a preteen involving escrow. I heard more as a preteen from adults that were older about escrow, and had not any kind of interest, of what I was hearing, at all, okay? But, like years later, being a drummer, okay, but like I went to the Center for Advanced Legal Studies to study to be a paralegal, okay? And I completed really 9 courses, but in my 10th course in real estate, I'm going, hey, where's all that information about escrow? Like are you on this planet? Because it's kind of like, where's all the information about escrow? All I heard it as being referred to as real estate, okay? Well, yet in my mind, it seemed to be the only thing about an account that's inadvertently associated with the word hidden. It's almost like a silent partnership. Not really a trust. But the word escrow is kind of like it's kind of like a silent partner, and in one way, and it's almost like a like a carbon footprint absentee voting, and a mechanics lien in another way. But a combine of the 30-year of like coverage of insurance, preventing any default or any irregularity would be considered thought of a monthly payment on a 30-year to a 40-year. There was like normally only 2 options, either a 30-year finance or a 40-year finance of like new homes. But it's presented as a finder's fee, and they're not really explaining everything about it. And it really, ultimately, what they refer to as the finder's fee is really about the entitlement in a combine of 30 and 40 being 70, like Vantage Low 30, or Secret de facto 30. Seemingly 70 years of that kind of, finder's fee that, quite a bit. Yet there's like escrow in my mind. It seemed to be somewhere between the ERISA statute and the IRA. It seemed to be like the Apple iPhone SE being the acronym SE being 24, yet Vision. Yet the thing, what I'm seeing is the Apple iPhone SE is almost like Spanish is yes, and the alphanumerics are 49. Yet in Vision, it's like the power squared and the E equal MC squared at the same time in pronunciation. Yet in English that the word C is like Vision, SEE, yet in Spanish it's only SE and yes, okay? And it's almost like the difference between calculus and quantum, and that symbolic representation is just the haloed left side, what looks like an O or an A, and the E. It's almost like Etna, and EA Sports is the exact opposite, asymmetrical of a 180 degree flip of like panoramic academia of peripheral tolerance. And it's already going on quite some time now. It's already going on like an hour and like 6 minutes and like 7 seconds right now. But it's like I was thinking about quite a bit about this, but I'm thinking about going beyond the thought of maybe a deed restriction or lifespan de facto as like experiencing some like experience of a Stargate program. Wow, it's like there's a designated driver beyond the Bluebird bus of like a Airbus H160, and ultimately in my mind, Geneva, Switzerland, the being venue not limited to of human civil rights, seemingly identifying, being itemized, going through a circuit, and some idea, becoming some idea of like human capital of investment terminology on the expenditure side. I mean, remembering, being taken to like, it's only because of world news and certain factors, realizing that those are the locations I was taken to, the being venue, and like other locations of the flags that give the impression of United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland. It's the summit meetings of like the Lexus LFSA, which is normally in my mind automatically something about LexisNexis, which is a search engine for like legal search engines, like Westlaw, okay? But Geneva's kind of like known as kind of like neutral, like involving what has previously been identified as like UN sanctions. Yet in my experience, it's not limited to. It only seemed to be the Vice President Network presented as like carbon footprint absentee voting. Yet of manufacturers that involve like the Hill HX50 helicopter, the Lexus LFSA. I'm not sure if my Free Sky Rocky Pro bike is there, but I was actually taking that location of the Free Sky Rocky Pro, and I met that guy. He's in that commercial, and he's saying, "Consider it shredded, Mr. President." And I think I've met him of an employer. I'm not sure where it is. I'm trying to actually place my memory, but I'm almost certain. But he's the guy. Somewhere in my mind, I'm almost thinking like the West Sam Houston Tollway of like a copier technician, and I'm thinking yet at the same time another location, the Clear Lake, Texas area of cutlery, of like fine dining, and the idea of a country club, or the thing about buffets and like the commercial venue of like 240 volts of like a commercial venue of living quarter, seemingly at that magnitude. That would maybe be the thought that might be whether it's required or not of a stationary engineer, yet not affected by television programming. A commercial venue of living quarter not affected by television programming is a deed restriction. There's a thing about, in my mind, the 240 volts and the air conditioning systems of like and the equipment for like a kitchen of that size. But like the 240% in the pawn shop, yeah. Similar thing about it, okay? But anyway, it's already going on. An hour and 8 minutes and like 58 seconds. So, I think I'm going to take a break right there, okay? So, like, there it is, okay?